It's 7:35. So, ladies and gentlemen, gender nonconforming and trans deities, thank yourself for tuning in to another exciting episode of the Hoodoisie. And we are keeping it radical in the time of Corona. That's right. During the pandemic, the Hoodoisie has teamed up with Southside Weekly, Chicago's coolest indie newspaper in the city, to bring you Pandemic Issues, which is a weekly series that gives you the analysis, perspective, and stories that mainstream media in the city is not. I'm your co-host, Ricardo Gamboa, or Ricardo Gamboa. Yo, I feel like I'm a child again, where I haven't learned how to like swallow when I'm talking, and so like all the saliva was gathering. I need to take a little sip. I'm your co-host, Ricardo Gamboa, or Ricardo Gamboa. Look at me just switch between my colonized tongues right there. Y'all don't know about that. And my pronouns are they, them, or as I am known in Europe, Bad Bitch University. And we are so excited to bring you today's show with my fellow co-hosts. I'll let them introduce themselves. Make it a race. Let's see who gets there first.
I'm Charles Preston.
Hey.
What do I do? Oh, I'm audience engagement for Injustice Watch, online Twitter troll. Yeah, I'm just happy to be here.
Hey everyone, I'm your co-host Jackie Serrato, editor-in-chief of the Southside Weekly. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm very excited for the show.
Hey, and we are so excited for our guest this evening on our show, Surviving COVID-19 While Native. We got Vanessa Casillas from Minneapolis. She's coming in from out of state, so we're a national news show is what we are. And Vanessa is calling in from the Minneapolis American Indian Center, Gatherings Cafe, and the Elders Food Program. What's up, Vanessa?
Hey, glad to be here, y'all.
Yo, let's give it up for Vanessa. We also hear from Chicago. We have the communications and campaign coordinator of the American Indian Center. Let's give it up for Frankie Pedersen. Woo! And our third guest is one of my favorite human beings in the entire world, the Auntie of the Chi Nations Youth Council and a member of the Hoodoisie staff. She runs all our social media. Let's give it up for Janie Pochel. It's kind of always awkward when we have someone like it's like always awkward. We got someone like Janie on the show because they see me like in Monday staff meetings when I'm just like, you know, not as like ebullient and joyous as I am here. So I feel like I'm being fake. And you know what? The truth is I'm a fake bitch. All right. Just kidding. That's not true. I'm super excited for this show. Surviving COVID While Native. It was a show that we've been thinking about doing for a while, and we finally were able to get together and put together. And so let's get into it. I think one of the things that I'm kind of like really excited about is like tonight we're on the show in this beautiful Zoom virtual room. We have some radical organizers that have been on the front lines of community care and mutual aid here in Chicago and Minnesota. And it's part of like the genealogy of the work you all have been doing, you know, even before the pandemic. So to start off, I want to learn kind of more about that work. So Janie, my dear friend Janie, could you give us some background on the Chi Nations Youth Council and, you know, how did it start and what is your role there?
The Chi Nations Youth Council started in 2012 as a response to the Idle No More movement, which was, it was like one of the most modern Native uprising, and it happened in Canada. So the kids wanted to protest. I wanted them to powwow and like, you know, do just the stuff I did as a youth. And they wanted to protest, so that's what we did. You know, it's an intertribal youth council. There's about 10 members. And the idea is that I'm the auntie, which means like, I drive them around, I like schedule appointments, you know, like I keep calendars, and then I really let them speak for themselves, and they've been doing a pretty great job.
Cool. And what is the work you all have been up to in Chicago, you know, leading, you know, before the pandemic even?
Well, we're focused on like social and environmental justice. We believe that land and water deserves its own rights. And we believe that Native people have the answers to like restoring the natural ways of like living sustainably. So with the little bit of knowledge that we know, we want to teach more people so they can live in Chicago as like somebody from Chicago might live. Like we teach them about the plants that are around the neighborhood, just so that they can have that relationship, and then it helps us as Native people related to the land, like then they see a relationship with themselves. So that's one of the main things we do. We travel the country. We won Youth Council of the Year last year at the National Unity Conference, which is like a national intertribal Native youth organization that I was in when I was a kid. And then we started the First Nations Garden. That's just a place for Native people to kind of, well, our mission is to create safe space for Native youth. So we got the First Nations Garden. It's 5 city lots. We have a community garden there. We got a wigwam. There's a sweat lodge that we don't really know how to use yet. We got like ancestral corn mounds. And then we just hang out there all of the time.
Wait, Janie, my favorite story ever is when you were telling me how you were doing homeschooling with the, with some, you guys were doing some kind of educational programming, and there was like, with like, I think it was like some white people or non-Native people, and they were like, oh, so you all think that the water is alive, and you can you just, and I forgot what you said, but it was like, no, it was basically like, can you just break like,
yeah, they said, oh, Janie, in your culture, you believe the water is alive. And I was like, and in your culture, you believe like you shit in the water, Because I didn't know, like, I was like, in my culture, like water is alive. I was like a little offended and kind of was like, well, no.
Well, I love when you were, I think when you first told me to, you're like, no, we know the water is alive in your culture. The amount of times I think I've heard you talk about white people shitting in water is like, even in your think piece for that we're gonna, that's coming out, you were like, and while our people were doing, we're stewarding the land, these motherfuckers came over and started shitting in our water.
Well, that's how I'm related to Chicago through the river. So like, I'm like, bro, that's our water. We need that.
Right. Cool. And Frankie, so I know that Chi Nations does some work out of the American Indian Center as well. I remember the first time I went to the American Indian Center, it was on Montrose, I believe. It was like this was like in like 96, I want to think, and there was this a silkscreen printing shop there, or a silkscreen printing studio there, I remember. And then I was like, oh shit, there's a lot of Native people in Chicago. I was like, wait, what? I was like, this ain't what they teach you. So wait, can you talk to us a little bit about about your work at the American Indian Center? And I think a little bit about the history of the American Indian Center. I don't think it's at the same location that it was when I was growing up, but I think it actually has a rich history in Chicago that a lot of people aren't even aware of. So can you break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I am the communications and campaigns coordinator. And the American Indian Center started in 1953, and it was kind of in response to, I think it's one of the, well, it's argued, but we like to say it's the first urban Native center in the country. And it kind of started as this need because of relocation. All of these natives were kind of being shipped to urban settings, right? And in like a way to like assimilate them, right? And so these natives would just get to Chicago and like not really, like they came from the res and not really know what to do or really how to make a life here. So yeah, the Indian Center came about. It started as kind of, they offered more social services. They helped people get jobs, and kind of was a gathering center, and has been for years. I think there's been 3 locations now. The last one was in Uptown, and they moved to the new location, I think around 4 years ago now. That's in Albany Park. And yeah.
Cool. Now, Vanessa, we're excited to introduce you to everyone calling in from Minnesota. You're actually from Chicago though, right? Is that what you were saying?
Yeah, I'm from Chicago. So like Janie and I went to youth group together. We went to Unity, traveled around, went to protest as youth. Yep.
And then you were also, I remember reading an article, and then Yasmin, our editorial producer, also sent me some other articles, about you as being a bricklayer in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Can you talk to us a little bit about that before I ask you the other question about how you got to Minnesota and all that other stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I follow after my dad. My dad is from Michoacan, Mexico, and he's a bricklayer, right? Well, he's a tuck pointer, but he does kind of like jack of all trades. So he does different scopes of masonry. He brought me to the job site. I think my first time I was 18 months old. He stuck me in a bucket, took me up on a swing stage, and then just kind of grew up on a job site. So 11, I started working with him. I was his little mason tender. And then I think it took me a long time to get into the union. So there was a lot of barriers to get in. It took me 5 years to break into the union, became a union bricklayer. I had a chip on my shoulder because it took so long, you know.
Yeah, you should. You're like, I've been doing this shit from 11, bro. Like, what the fuck?
They didn't want to give me space. I was too feminine. I looked too other, you know. It was a lot of hetero cis white men that were just not about my presence. So, you know, I started competing, started whooping their asses in competitions, traveled around doing competitions and winning as an apprentice.
Wait, they have bricklaying competitions?
They do. When you're an apprentice, like, yeah, they do. You know, you want to earn bragging rights and you want to be able to like show off your talent and skill. And for me, it was also a way to like shut the naysayers up, right? Everyone's telling me on the job site, well, not everybody, but you know, every now and then they didn't like my existence. So they make it extra hard and talk shit. And so I'm like, all right, I'm just going to compete. And then you guys can see my skill.
She's like, you see this motherfucker? You see this motherfucker? You see
you win some cash, you know, you win some cool tools. It's a good day spent. So yeah, I did some competitions, and mostly I was trying to encourage other women to come in. I wanted company. I didn't want to be like one of the few women. I still am though. And it was just kind of like, you know, I grew up with it. It was so familiar to me. The smells, the sounds, working with my hands keeps me like really at peace. If I'm still too long, I'm like really agitated and anxious. So I like physical jobs that keep me moving. And, you know, honestly, it's in my DNA. You know, my ancestors were mound builders and pyramid builders. So it makes perfect sense that, you know, I'd want to do it.
Yeah. Vanessa, I'm just kind of interested because, right, like I didn't know you were your family's from Michoacan. So even thinking about like how Mexicanidad so often kind of like erases its indigenous aspects. How is that, you know, how is that something that you've negotiated or seen in your life?
Yeah, so it's a little odd because in my family, you know, my dad is from Michoacan, my mom is Ho-Chunk, her father was Yaqui, but she didn't know him. So we were raised more like Ho-Chunk and Chicana. And so from my Mexican side, they really don't embrace the indigeneity, right? My dad, his lineage on that side is Purepecha and a little bit Spaniard. So, but his relatives really don't embrace it too much. You know, my dad will speak on it and identify. One of my uncles will, and the rest kind of just try to squash it and try to like become just, you know, mixed. They want to kind of like align themselves with being more Hispanic or white and separate themselves from being indigenous, because a lot of times I think it's almost like a class thing where it's, you know, if you're super brown and indigenous, they associate that with being stupid, with being dirty, with being poor, all these really bad things, right? So they try to distance themselves from that and align themselves with whiteness. And for me, it was really odd because at the same time, they have this like romanticized image in their minds about indigenous folks from North America, from the States, you know. So it's like, oh, she's La India, and then they, you know, she's a healer, she's like all these great things. Meanwhile, my cousin, who's also, you know, the same lineage as, well, close to, like they have Purepecha in them too, they will almost distance themselves, and she's like the black sheep because her skin is too dark, because she, you know, practices healing with herbs. You know, it's, for her it's taboo, but for me it's embraced because they call me La India because I'm native from the US. Yeah. So, and they never get my tribal affiliation, right? Even though they're my family, a lot of times they'll call me like, some relatives will say I'm like Apache, and I'm like, no, it's like complete different nation. We have no similarities whatsoever. We're not just, you know, one big group. But
you're like, anyways. That's like calling folks people, motherfucker. What you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And so then talk to us about Minnesota and how you got out there in the, you know, in the elders program.
Yeah, so I relocated to Minneapolis for the second time in my life just in February. So I've been here before for a short time, like 3 years or so, and then went back to Chicago. Chicago was getting too expensive. It's getting so gentrified. I couldn't afford it. So I had to do something, and I just moved back up to Minneapolis in February. Right around then is when the pandemic hit. Like literally, my pets are still in Chicago. Some of my shit is still in Chicago. Mm-hmm. And like everything's just kind of like in limbo, on pause, and in transition all at the same time. So I ended up here, and I wasn't doing well, you know, in quarantine, trying to keep myself from getting sick because I wanted to come back home and see my parents, get my animals. see my family. So I was trying to keep quarantined, but you know, that doesn't do good for my mind. Like I like to stay busy. I was getting depressed. I was getting very anxious. And yeah, I let Brian Yazzie and a bunch of other chefs, indigenous chefs, know that, you know, the work that I was able to experience with them through different indigenous food summits and this feast that my tribe hosted in January, which was called the Hunters and Gatherers Feast. That work for me was like so rewarding, so nourishing, and so fulfilling. So I let all these chefs know that I was ready to make some kind of transition, right? To kind of step away from maybe the union bricklaying because it can be so toxic. And in Minnesota, my experience working here back in 2010 through 13, a lot of the job sites I was on, there was a different level of racism and sexism and violence than I had experienced in Chicago. So I wasn't eager to get back to that, right? And so I let indigenous chefs know that I was ready to kind of bridge over, and I wasn't sure exactly how. My idea was that I would focus on maybe brick ovens, and that would be my niche, and do those for like,
you are like that's the Mexican in you, that entrepreneurial, like, you know, I'm gonna
let me shift this around. And literally my dad's been building them since he was 9. So I'm like, Papi, this is my plan. He's like, oh, I got you. Like, we'll do a few for my workers. We'll put one in your yard, our yard, and then you'll nail it. And that'll be your niche. So that was my plan. And you know, I wanted to build them for Native communities, right? I wanted, like, you know, go back home, Chi Nations, you know, with the First Nations garden there. I wanted to build them one. Like this was before the pandemic, before we knew it was going to last this long, right? But yeah, so I let these chefs know that I was interested in crossing over. And then Chef Brian Yazzie hit me up with this opportunity to come volunteer. And he said, you know, we want to feed our elders. You know, everything that's going on in the media right now, as it's exploding over in Europe, we're hearing about how elders are being just kind of discarded. They're being forgotten. They're being treated as if they're disposable. And, you know, he was just really worried about how, you know, we were just a few weeks behind them. And we didn't, you know, I think all of us were really worried about our elders, our loved ones who were elderly, and how they were going to receive, you know, how they were going to deal with it. So we just said, we want to do something. Let's just focus on feeding. We can't, you know, make 3 meals a day, but we can make 1 meal a day. We can make sure they have a really good lunch. And, you know, for me, the beautiful thing about it is like the space that I'm in now with these, it's quite a collaborative effort, right? There's a bunch of volunteers, some really amazing people, and the people in the kitchen, the way we work is so far different than on a construction site, right? It's all like the same hustle and bustle. You really have to be like a worker bee. You have to be creative and think on your feet, which is similar to construction. However, the difference is that everybody is so nurturing, so positive. You know, we're all uplifting. And even on days when, you know, you may not be all in that positive mindset, somebody around you is going to give you some positivity. And, you know, thank you for your efforts. We're all thanking each other constantly. And we remind each other of, like, we'll even act it out, right? In talking about the meals. Ooh, there's going to open up this box and just be like, oh, you know, this is going to be good. They're going to be stacking on pounds, you know, coming out of pandemic looking thick, you know, and we just make all kinds of jokes about it because, you know, we want that energy going into the food too, right? And for us, you know, like if there's a pause in it, you know, we all know it's going to go back to quarantine and kind of like isolated. We're kind of each other's germ pods right now, right? Like we're all safe to hang out with one another. And it's really been a blessing. And while others I know are having like a really difficult time with the pandemic, for me, it's difficult because I can't see my folks. But at the same time, I feel blessed to be able to do this work.
Yeah, so I'm thinking right now, right? I'm thinking like you know, Janie and Francesca, you're here in Chicago. Vanessa, you're in Minneapolis, right? I'm thinking about like how we even conceive of Native, right? And I think a lot of like people in the U.S. they like read a Sherman Alexie book, they watch like Smoke Signals or the Business of Fancy Dancing, you know what I'm saying? And they're like, oh, that's what it is, right? Or they kind of read these. You know, they read headlines that are usually about, you know, Native life on reservations. And I think one of the tricks of white supremacy, right, historically has been the disappearing Native people, and not through outright genocide, it's through, you know, memory or through forms of representation, and even, you know, media representation. And so like, you know, I think about how so many people believe Native people are just gone, right? They're an element of the past. And then, you know, again, like today's media doesn't help, right? I mentioned those works that constantly kind of depicts Native people as like, these very kind of stoic healers, or, or tragic, or often depictions of Native as just like a general identity. And, here we are talking with three, Native women that are living in, urban environments. And so it just made me want to ask, kind of throw a question out to you all. This is like the you bitches need to understand question, right? Like when we talk about Native identity, what are like some of the things, like the complexities that get erased and that you wish people, like knew and, and talked about? Is that a fair question? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Whoever, yeah, grab it.
I can go. I think like, just like the different political identities that every Native person has. So like me, I'm First Nations. I have a different political identity with the United States than like Vanessa, who's American Indian. So she's enrolled in a nation. I'm enrolled in a different nation, but it's in Canada. So and then that nation's like 35 different bands that just kind of got clumped together into one nation. So there's those two political identities. And then there's just like the general, are you Native American by blood?
Like Elizabeth Warren.
Yeah. Or are you Native American by stories, like Elizabeth Warren? Their great grandma was Cherokee. I'll take that somewhere else.
Right.
But, yeah, so it's like there's different complexities, and then like even to understand tribal nations there's a responsibility the United States has to those nations. So those nations are older than the United States, and a lot of people think like, oh, the U.S. owes these people, these people owe the U.S. when the U.S. is like occupying our land and has broke every single treaty that they wrote with us. So they're illegally occupying all of our lands. But there's, like I'm OG Cree. That's an identity. I can call myself Anishinaabe. I can say there's all these things, but usually I just say Native or First Nations.
And Frankie and Vanessa?
Yeah, I think Janie touched on a lot of what I was going to say, but I think something that people don't often think about or are surprised, even like you at the beginning, you were like, oh, I didn't know that many Natives like lived in Chicago. I think so much of the media and stories that people are introduced to, especially like non-Natives, is from a very certain perspective, and that's like the reservation Native, right? When it's like now 70% of Native people live in urban settings. And that's something that you never really see the perspective of, and I think really contributes to like the erasure of Native people in urban settings, because it's harder when you're not, like nowadays, like you can't just like look at someone and be like, oh yeah, like that person's Native, like they look like everyone, and so like it's weird because we're not in this like one centralized area, and so people often are like, oh yeah. And also, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but like we live in Chicago with the Blackhawks, there are so many of those of the mascots all around city, and it's like this headless Indian. And again, like what you said, it's like people with these mascots, with these symbols, it just places us in a historical past, right? It places us as these caricatures with headdresses on horseback, when like we are like modern and contemporary people, right? So it just is, especially in Chicago with the Blackhawks, I feel like it's like so hard because you're constantly battling this like other narrative where it's like, oh yeah, I didn't know Natives still existed. It's like, I'm right here.
Right. Yeah. When me and Janie, for like one of the first times we hung out was like at my crib, and I was like, because there's like 6,000 Native people in Chicago. She's like, there's 60,000 urban Natives, and I was like, oh, I must have really skimmed that article and got that statistic wrong. Vanessa, how about you? You want to chime in on this? Get in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think Janie and Frankie kind of really covered it. We're all individual nations. We have different etiquette, different protocol, different customs, different slang. And then being in the urban setting, a lot of times you have to almost become very familiar with others that you're around, respect their ways. Here in Minneapolis, there's a lot of Dakota, Lakota, Anishinaabe, different bands of Anishinaabe. And so yeah, I have to also respect their protocols when I'm in space with them, sharing space with them. I'll pick up on some languages. It's kind of just a courtesy. I'm going to learn how to say thank you in your language. Pick up on those little subtleties just out of respect. And I like that Frankie talked about that we are very contemporary people. We're here, we're modern, we're present. And yeah, definitely mascots just keep us in the past, and they're able to kind of suppress us. When folks want to just keep that image of us, they erase everything else about our existence present day. So yeah.
I understand. I always thought about, though, if I did ever buy a baseball team, I would change the name to the Faggots. Okay. I saw you leaning in, Charles. You got something?
So yeah, like much of like what we learned in school about like the foundations of this country is like, straight up propaganda and erasure. Like I know, like coming up in CPS, like Native history was the Mayflower, the French and Indian War, the Trail of Tears, and that's about it.
Right.
So, Janie, for our forthcoming journal, Never Normal Again, you've written a piece about biowarfare and disease. Could you walk us through some of that history, that Native history with biowarfare and disease?
Yeah, I think since the invasion, they didn't really we believe like in sustainability and cleanliness, and when the invasion happened, they didn't really have the same values as us when it came to like hygiene. So there's all these diseases that came, and when they noticed we started dying from it, they started spreading them intentionally. I know my tribe had smallpox before we even seen a European person. Like it just kind of came not out of nowhere. We heard the stories, but it was just something that was there. And then as soon as they realized how much it was killing us, then they started intentionally spreading it, putting us in prison camps, making sure that we got it. I know the flu hit us hard, the smallpox hit us hard, and smallpox hit us in different ways, they started aligning it with like the slaughter of after westward expansion, they really started just murdering the shit out of everybody, and at the same time they're spreading smallpox, so we're just getting hit on all sides. I know my tribes we fled north, and it took a little while longer before we actually got hit again by something, but it's just that that it was done intentionally, that they knew that holding us in camps or reservations or in these prisons was making us sick and we were dying. They knew that not only that, but they killed all of our food. They cut down our forests. They had us fleeing all of the time. So it wasn't just a biological warfare. It was just really, and it still hasn't stopped. My dad was actually kidnapped. It just keeps going and going and going.
Yeah, I think Janie. Oh, sorry, Charles.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just thinking when Janie, when you were talking about the 60s swoop in Canada, which was, when the government, went down and intentionally broke up families, it's not dissimilar from what's happening with immigrant children today, undocumented children today, where they were even lost to the system. Many of them were abused, found themselves in abusive shelters or homes or things like that. And so that was just it. Sorry, Charles, I'll never interrupt you again. Otherwise, I'm just being anti-Black. It's like anti-Black misandry right over here.
Yeah. Also, I want to touch on this COVID. All right. And y'all respective organizations had to shift in order to meet the urgent needs of your community. And so, Frankie, I'm curious as to how the American Indian Center shifted during this time, with the onset of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the biggest shifts has probably been our food distribution program. It started really right when the pandemic hit. We kind of really got right into it, and every Friday we were distributing boxes, and sometimes serving up to well over 100 families. And so I think that has been the biggest shift, and I really see that as a silver lining, because I think like one of the biggest critiques for like my organization is that like I wish we offered more social services and like aid to a lot of Native families. You know, first and foremost, I think we are an educational institution. But it's so heartbreaking because like pre-pandemic, like we'd get so many calls being like, oh, like my family needs help. We're Native, like, can you help us? And I would have to direct them to other organizations, or they'd be like, hi, I'm Native, I'm stranded in Chicago, I need help getting home. And there was something really set in place like systemically that we could do to help these people, which like broke my heart every time. And I would like do what I can to like direct them to the right people. But to kind of see this big shift on like we have food distribution, we got a grant, we were able to give away like a bunch of like $500 checks to like elders and people in our community who were affected. So to see that, I think I really hope like after this pandemic, which like, you know, at this point, whatever that means, we continue doing that. As well as like we're also really trying to serve the Albany Park community as well. You know, the center is relatively new to Albany Park, and it's just right that's like, yes, we need to serve like our Native community, but it is also equally as important to serve the community of Albany Park, because we just kind of, you know, came in, bought this building 4 years ago and just kind of set ourselves there. I think we've also really been trying to focus on transforming a lot of our online programming. I think we have a lot of really great like arts and youth programming to offer at the Indian Center. So I think part of my job as a communications and campaigns person, that it's kind of been me collaborating with all my other coworkers and being like, how can I support you to transform like what you do like virtually? I know with our youth program, we've been doing a lot of like take-home activities that you could like pick up, like different activities at the center that you could do at home. My favorite one is Little One Story Time, which like our education coordinator, Frankie Pedersen, she, each coworker picks like a book and they read a children's book and she does curriculum for it with like activities and stuff to do at home. And I think this is great because the Native community isn't geographically located, right? And because of that, that has been a huge barrier for a lot of our programming, because it's just getting kids to the center. You know, like there are Native kids all over Chicago, and so that has been kind of the biggest barrier in getting people to the center and to participate in these programming. So again, not a good thing, but I suppose the silver lining of this is that this is now available to all Native kids like across the city. Anyone can access this, as well as not just in Chicago, but like, you know, all across the country. People have access to these videos. They have access to this curriculum and activities to do. So I think that that's kind of been like the shift, and we're continuously looking for new ways to transform our programming and make them more accessible and fun, you know.
Vanessa, any shifts in the elders food program? What has that looked like during this time?
Yeah, so I wasn't, you know, I just got to Minneapolis in February. So, and before that I was a bricklayer. So I'm kind of, you know, I'm new to the Gatherings Cafe. When I was last here in Minneapolis, the Gatherings Cafe didn't exist. It was a different, it was owned by somebody and they did a whole different thing. So from what I understand, the Gatherings Cafe during COVID was, you know, of course, the centers closed down. They were getting less and less orders for takeout and food orders. So they just ended up kind of closing the cafe. And I think it was like a week later is when Brian reached out to the executive chef there and, you know, asked if they wanted to collab and do this program too. It's called, you know, if you look up the hashtag feeding our elders, you'll see all our food pics and our efforts and our stories about it. And then he just kind of, then Brian reached out to a bunch of folks who might want to volunteer. So the team is kind of mixed up of staff who are employed by the center through Gatherings Cafe, and then volunteers. We also have like a whole bunch of folks who are volunteering in terms of like helping us drive, folks who reach out to redistribute food. And so we have like, you know, a lot of support coming from different angles and different places, which we're really, really grateful for. So the elders' meals, I think before, you know, they would go to the center and eat there and through their elders meals program. and that had to stop because the center was closed and it wasn't safe for elders to travel there and go into the building. And in place of that, you know, we developed a different meal program where they would get meals that we would craft based on what we get in. So we have to really think on our feet, right? Because if we get like, you know, 40 loaves of bread and, you know, a bunch of cabbage, and we just have to supplement it with other things so that we can make a wholesome meal, which we try to also incorporate, you know, at least 50% of the ingredients. We try to have them intentionally be native ingredients or indigenous ingredients. So, you know, we have to kind of work with what we have and then supplement it, think on our feet, be creative, and then also kind of be organized in terms of getting the meals to the elders, getting them fed, and shifting. Like when the uprising happened, we shifted to doing more groceries, hygiene, and household cleaning items to make sure that those elders were covered. You know, it was just a little crazy because then we also had to board up the American Indian Center in Minneapolis because of where it was located. And, you know, it was on a busy street. Police were kind of up and down that street. National Guard was up and down that street. So it got boarded up, and, you know, we couldn't continue our routes because delivery drivers weren't able to access certain places because of what was going on. So it's shifted, and now we're back to doing meals. And, you know, we try to keep it in mind that, you know, people have different tastes, and they sometimes want like comfort food. You know, we can't just make it all indigenous and decolonized because, well, yes, we would love that for that to be, you know, we're limited by time, we're limited by ingredients. And also we want to also offer some kind of more nostalgic foods, but we also want them to be culturally appropriate, you know.
Yo, I made the worst mistake of looking up the feeding our elders hashtag, because one, I'm on a juice fast, and like, so I haven't eaten anything in like 4 days, and that shit looks so damn delicious though. The duck, and I'm a vegan, and now I want meat so bad. The duck was so there. I was like, come on.
Like, so I learned how to butcher a rabbit, right? And so being an urban native, I don't always have access to these foods, let alone butchering and then learning how to prepare them, right? So I got to butcher a rabbit. I learned how to prepare it. And it is one of the best foods. Oh my goodness, it's so good. It's so good. Wow. And we put it into like a lentil soup when we prepared it. So we're getting ready to accept some more rabbits, I think maybe in 2 weeks or so. And, you know, I'm going to take that hide from the last rabbit, which I have like chilling downstairs, right? I joke and I say, like, I get the bunnies out of my garden sometimes by showing them that skin. No, I'm not gonna skin these rabbits.
I want to get that lentil soup. Fuck you, Bugs Bunny. It's on.
Yeah. But, you know, that bunny's gonna turn into some earrings or some bracelets or something, or, you know, something. It's gonna be used up. And so, and I'm learning so much with this program because the chefs are so talented and they're just, you know, very, very generous with their knowledge. So, did I cover everything about your question there?
Great.
Okay, cool.
So the conversation around the fake history surrounding Christopher Columbus goes back a long time, right? At the very least to the 60s. And there's also a rich history in Latin America of indigenous communities toppling the monuments and statues of colonizers and oppressive figures in history. So given that this is not new, what exactly is new, or what exactly inspired the recent events where we have seen the bringing down, removing the statues of Christopher Columbus in various cities, including Minneapolis and Chicago? What exactly built up the momentum for this to take place? And is there any connection to Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, I think it's directly correlated to Black Lives Matter. I know, at least in the decolonial work I work on, decolonization is not only, you know, the return of land, but it's also the abolishment of slavery, because those things are what colonized our lands. So if we're gonna work on getting our land back, we have to also abolish slavery at the same time. And as we know, as American history, you know, slavery never ended. They just switched it over to a prison industrial, you know, complex. So when we've been doing like uprisings, or, you know, like I Don't Know More was one, Standing Rock was another one. And just when those opportunities come about, we're gonna jump on them. So when we seen this happening, we seen everybody getting, woke or whatever. They started saying stuff like, "Oh, you can't have justice on stolen land," but you're not even bringing us into these conversations. So when we were talking about, like how are natives going to support this movement, we didn't want it to be like the Oppression Olympics. We wanted it to be intentional, to build an actual coalition between natives and Black communities. So like back in June, we had this idea to do the solidarity action. So we didn't know what it was yet. And we decided like, let's take our time with this. Let's be intentional. Let's meet together. Let's have food together. Let's get to know each other and understand like, what are the obstacles that we share and how can we support each other in the things that we don't share the same thing. And it was something that was amazing. And I think that energy of Black and Indigenous people coming together really inspired a lot of people. So after the rally, we made it clear that we don't police people's protests, and that we're going to protect each other. So I think when people got all inspired by seeing the solidarity, they just decided, let's try to take these statues down. And eventually they did come down, so even if it wasn't successful then, it ended up coming down in the end. And we got a laughing John FOP, what's his name's face, while it was coming down.
Yeah, that Trump supported dude, that Trumper in the FOP. Like,
Vanessa, did you see this?
It's just good to watch. It's just good to watch statues of white men fall. Like, I just like watching that. Like, the shit is great.
So Vanessa, while you were in Minneapolis, which you missed in your home city over here in Chicago, the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, John Catanzara, wrote a letter to Trump. It was bizarre. It was like if I was writing like a Mean Girls version, it was like, "Dear Trump, I am your biggest fan. I love you. And when Ron is there, I used to tell him I love you." And it was so like nuts. Like, but he like wrote this like letter that was basically like telling him to come in. And then he was also like on the whole, like, racist Italian Americans that want to use the idea of Italian American pride and Christopher Columbus, was standing out there. And I just remember seeing Janie's Twitter and Facebook of being like, look at John over here, want to cry. And I was like,
yes.
So Vanessa, what's some of the stuff you saw kind of playing out in Minnesota around this?
Yeah, so Black Lives Matter was just out in the streets and really moving people to come out and take space. And I think I saw some tributes, some healing dances that happened over in George Floyd Square. There was some solidarity actions. I wasn't able to participate in any of them. I'm working in the kitchen, so I really have to be careful about, being in large groups and even how frequently I go to stores and stuff. So, I was just kind of like watching as people would stream. And yeah, then the statue came down, and that was I think some elders went out, but the momentum was there because folks are just tired of these monuments, to white supremacy, these monuments to genocide and slavery. And, it's just like people are fed the fuck up, and it's beyond time. And, as people are getting more empowered and more inspired, and also, basically, I guess it kind of boils down to, when shit hits the fan, what are the things that really matter, right? Supporting your community, backing up, holding space for one another. And, this has been top on the list for a minute, but I think because of momentum and because, folks are just ready for change. It's a long time coming. It's time.
I love that you were like, it's a long time, and I was like 500 fucking years. Frankie, anything you want to add? Sorry, Charles. Charles, I don't mean to interrupt you.
You weren't interrupting me.
I don't want to do it anymore. I'm sorry.
You weren't interrupting me.
Okay. Frankie, anything you want to throw in on this?
Yeah, I think I helped also, because I'm also a member of Shy Nation, so I helped with the whole rally and everything. But I think one of my biggest frustrations recently, this rally happened like 2 weeks ago, and we're already seeing the erasure of all the Black, Brown, and Indigenous youth that got pepper sprayed and beat to make sure the statue came down. You know, we are already seeing like articles and people talking about and completely disregarding the youth that led this movement. And at the end of the day, it's like they are the ones who made this happen. And I think this rally, really changed. This rally and the rally last Friday, I think really changed the course of this movement in Chicago right now for the rest of the summer, right? And to not acknowledge that the Black, Brown, Indigenous youth are the ones who did that has been so frustrating and so disheartening to see. You know, someone I know got her hand broken by the police, you know, and it's I got pepper sprayed, I got beat, all my friends got pepper sprayed and beat to make sure the statue came down, you know. So to see that narrative completely getting erased is really frustrating. But I think we need to continue uplifting these youth. We need to continue uplifting Shy Nations. We need to continue uplifting Good Kids Mad City and all these other really great, amazing young people who are leading this movement, you know.
Mm-hmm. I was so proud. I was so proud to see all that. Honestly, I was giving daily updates, sometimes twice a day to the cafe, you know, and I'm sure I'm yeah, they're okay, Vanessa, enough with the updates. But I was very, very proud and, you know, very just energized by all the work you all were doing. And the fact that I knew some of the folks who were very inspirational and, you know, keeping the momentum up.
Right.
Yeah, and it just wasn't anybody that got their hand broken. This was Simon Pokagan's great-great-granddaughter. He's the one who sued the city for the land that we were protesting on. You know, they beat Simon Pokagan's granddaughter.
Damn.
It's wild.
Mm-hmm.
So some people have asked, well, why don't the youth just go about it the right way, right? And I understand that you all have been organizing for years, right? You've tried to pass resolutions and ordinances to get rid of Columbus Day in CPS and the city. And I'm sure there are other efforts that not everybody knows about. Is that something you would like to talk about right now?
I can talk. I just want to touch on the beginning of this, and I'm going to talk as not nonprofit Frankie. I'm going to just talk as regular Frankie or Shy Nations Frankie.
It's thoughts are my own. It's on everyone's Twitter account.
I have to separate myself sometimes, but honestly, the mayor and the police don't give a shit if we shut down Lakeshore Drive. They don't give a shit. They give a shit when there's property damage and rioting. That's the only time that they ever listen, and that's the only way we're going to continue this momentum through this movement. So as much as you know, I'm all for yes, let's take to the streets. Let's shut down Lakeshore Drive and sit down and sing songs. I'm all for that, sure, but at the same time, I think we need movements and stuff like this, because as we've seen, everything else falls on deaf ears. From the mayor, from the police, from really everyone. Yeah, and I'll go back to nonprofit Frankie now.
They look the same. Nonprofit Frankie and it's like they're twins. Oh, Janie, you were gonna say something, I think.
I forgot what I was gonna say.
Vanessa, I saw you reaching for that.
So my hand expressions, I just want to explain what that was. I'm so horrible at hiding my expressions sometimes. So the part of your question where it was the right way, right? To me, that hits me sometimes. Those kind of questions hit me almost like an abuser does when you're being gaslit, right? So we're gonna have this monument to fucking a pedophile. It's really a celebration of white supremacy, of all the horrendous murders and torturing that this person did and that he condoned. And then, you know, so just all these horrible things. And this is up daily as a celebration. And it kind of offers this, you know, it pretty much tells people this is what we're going to go with. This is what we're going to tolerate. This is the status quo. And, you know, if you've ever dealt with an abuser, they always turn it around on you. How come you don't act right? How come you can't stay in your lane? How come you don't talk to me respectfully? Watch your tone. How come you can't control your anger? All that kind of shit. And for me, when there's that kind of question posed, it's almost like, and I know a lot of these questions come from the media.
Right.
It's because the media is racist and the media is an abuser. Sometimes they uphold abusers, they uphold abuse and oppression and racist society. So for me, those questions, I almost just want to stop it right there in the bud when it's like, oh, the right way, let's talk about that. You know, let's talk about what is deemed the right way and why are we expected to have a certain, you know, it's almost like, okay, we want you to behave in a certain way. We want to police your tone, and we're going to do all these little things to press your buttons and test you. And, you know, when you can't adhere to the boundaries that we put up against you, then we're going to call you out for your behavior, you know? I mean, so also, that's part of it.
And like speaking like with that gaslit thing too, right? It's also like racists are so stupid. Like they're like, they really are like so dumb. Cause I think about this, right? Like even when they're like, you know, they're like, someone's like Black Lives Matter, like all lives matter. And you're like, oh, you know what I mean? So we want to make sure, you know, and even when like, one of the things that was like so crazy about like with the statues was the amount of people. I know this one, you know, guy that I know from like back in the day was like, why does everyone care so much about, why do they care so much about a statue? I'm like, you're right. Why does anyone care so much about a statue? So let's take it down. You know what I mean? If you're defending anything, take it down. And then like, you know, you see these Italian Americans are like, oh, you know, that happened 500 years ago. I'm like, and so you're proud about something from 5 centuries ago? Like, you know, how about Mario and Luigi? They saved the fucking princess out of a castle. And, you know, that was only 30 years ago in the 90s. So how about we, you know, be proud of that? Or Mario's Italian Lemonade. That's contributing something good.
My thing is Chicago's commitment to like the fucking statue. Like, Lori wouldn't budge, city council wouldn't budge, and then there's multiple Columbus statues. And then you only have like a bust of like John DuSable and his wife, who was a Potawatomi woman. She ain't got shit in her name at all. Like,
I mean, but it's even just like how the whole city is like commemorate. You know, there's that native statue in Lincoln Park. There's also the, you know, all the Fort Dearborn, Fort this, Fort that, and I'm just like, bitch, like we are under attack, like, you know. So at least they got it accurate. But I'm just like, yo, like it is really bizarre the amount of homage to colonialism is actually embedded in Chicago. That is just kind of everywhere. And I think that's a good segue into talking about the Blackhawks, right? Which was as one of our you know, our last questions up here. And I think that, you know, you guys at Chi Nations have been doing, you know, a lot of work around this kind of around the situation with the Blackhawks. So Janie, can you and Frankie and Vanessa talk to us a lot about, or Janie and Frankie, I think maybe you guys could speak more about too, you know, the Blackhawks a little bit. And Vanessa, if you got anything as well, chime on in. But I also just have another question that I want to talk to Vanessa about. That's why I wasn't trying to exclude you, Vanessa. It was just I wanted to give you special time for something else, but maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we won't. I'm gonna stop talking now because it's not. I mean, well, it is kind of my show, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I think the idea, like now they're trying to spin this narrative like, oh, it's respectful, it's honoring, but like let's remember 1926. Like what was happening to Native Americans in 1926, you know? This was the peak of the creation of these stereotypes, the disappearing Indian, the noble Indian, you know, like that's when it all started. So it's always been propaganda. And then if you even read Blackhawk's autobiography, he said if he knew that he was going to be paraded around and shown off to all these white people, he never would have started fighting in the first place, you know? So he doesn't want to be paraded around like this. His family doesn't want him to be paraded around like this. And this idea, like, we see it as a beheaded Blackhawks because they took his head. As soon as he died, they unburied him, they put him on display, and they took his head, and nobody knows where his head is. His family never got his body back. So if they really honored and respected this man, then he'd have a body right now, and he'd have a burial place, and his family would know where he is. You know, so they've had almost 100 years to educate people about Native people, and they chose not to. In 2010, all of a sudden, this conversation started up again, and they needed to buy up some Indians right quick. And since Rocky Wirtz is on the board of trustees at the Field Museum, he has direct access to all these natives who are experts in being Native, you know, so he had his pick on who to buy up, who to have, And now there's all these, crack, like, I don't want to say, all these like loony natives trying to sell us all out, like for.
I was gonna say, because isn't there something that like I think I saw some article that was like championing the Blackhawks because they donate back to the Native community, and there were these natives kind of saying like, oh, we're okay with that. I'm not making that up, right?
No, so the Indian Center used to take money from the Blackhawks. The Trickster Gallery in Schaumburg takes money from the Blackhawks. And in those community meetings in like 2012, 2011, the community was like, what the hell is this? Like, why are we doing this? And it was for $20,000. This is $1 billion franchise. And they're throwing pennies at us to keep us quiet, and the community seen that, and they kept on with the relationship. And when it got to a point where, they were bringing in all these natives from the suburbs, from the reservation to speak for us, started saying that we can't speak on our own experiences because we're not native enough now. All of a sudden being urban native isn't native enough. So they just disregarded our whole lived experience, the whole relationship, having to grow up with this image in school, having to compete with trying to look like that, as a kid. Like, that's how Indian's supposed to. I don't look like that. I'm light skinned, I got light eyes. I don't look like that. So why is people trying to force that onto me? And it just continued on. So since 2012, since we started, we've been trying to, working to get these images removed from at least public schools,
Yeah. Oh, you mean like also like high schools that have native mascots?
Yeah, like Lane Tech. That's the only one I can think of, but.
Yo, let's do a Hoodoisie social media brigade and just call them all out.
Field Museum, Lane Tech.
And we'll get to the Field Museum, but I know I want Frankie and Vanessa to jump in before we carry on the convo. Anything that you all want to add?
Yeah, I think that the Indian Center, put out a statement in 2017, like a formal statement about breaking ties with the Blackhawks. I really think it would be beneficial for us to like denounce race-based mascots as a whole, because like as we see with everything with the Washington football teams, like name change, this is like obviously like resurfacing. So like we used to get like emails all the time being like land acknowledgements, but now we're getting like them like, oh, mascots. And so we're getting like a lot of people, especially like we're talking with people from Lane Tech and whatnot. And so I think we just need to have like another statement and maybe do something like what we did for like Indigenous Peoples Day, like just have, like we made a toolkit for that, and maybe have like resources, like have like data, have resources, like have our statement in it to like mass produce, because now we're in kind of a shift right now. And we're getting a lot of questions about that. And people are sending us their petitions and are like, oh, we're trying to get the mascot, like, changed at our school. And it's like, I don't have time to like focus on this school in like the middle of Illinois. I have other things I have to worry about. So I think that would be worth our organization doing. I know also like we're a member of the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, and they haven't also made a formal statement on the Blackhawks or race-based mascots at all. And one of the organizations, the Tricksters, still takes money from the Blackhawks. So I definitely think that needs to be addressed in our community. But I guess that's not really my place.
I want to do sexuality-based mascots, because I would have the Chicago Bottoms. And it would be, that would be my team. It would be a baseball team, just because I like bats. And so, hey, Vanessa, you want to add something onto that?
Just segue right there, huh? I guess I want to say, like, this has been an ongoing battle since I was a youth, since Janie and I were youth in Urban Natives of Chicago. Like, we were children speaking on this, speaking to adults who were then supporting, both yelling and crying that they were so offended that their tradition was going to get ripped away, and then shouting at us that they were doing this to honor us, meanwhile ignoring everything that we said. And I just want to amplify just how much work our youth are doing to educate people. Like, Frankie's talking about, they have to make a statement and do all these bullet points to educate people, yet folks are out there who just want to keep it because it's tradition, because it's their idea of a romanticized Indian who looks like what they think we should, a beheaded native that is an image that's docile, it's inhuman, and it's static,
Yeah,
to me that represents a lot. So
before Charles and Jackie take away the show, I do think that one of the questions I want to close out on, right, is this notion of, whenever we talk about decolonization, we're talking about land, but we're also talking about sovereignty, right? And kind of like the restoration of sovereignty. And so I think about that because some of the amazing work that Chi Nations has been doing during the pandemic is kind of mutual aid efforts with berry drop-offs, also kind of recultivating the land at the First Nations garden. Vanessa, the work that you're doing, and with the elders program. And so, we've heard these terms like food desert, food apartheid, or a food desert that then evolved into food apartheid because of the problematics of that term, right? But why I'm saying that is because I think one of the things we don't think about is like indigenous food sovereignty. And so I'm wondering if in this moment right now, when literally there's people that are unemployed, people going hungry, where, where people, how, if we could talk a little bit about that and the importance of that, because I think that's a way that we can also talk about how people can support both of your efforts in Minneapolis and then here in Chicago.
Yeah, I think part of food sovereignty is growing, obviously growing our own food, but actually getting to know the place that we live is also part of that indigenous process of understanding, what food to grow, how to grow it, what environment are we in, what's gonna take here. There's a lot of things that come into that, but right away, as soon as the pandemic hit, we ordered a bunch of soil, and we wanted to get soil out and gardens out to our community so they can grow their own food, because we knew they weren't going to be able to come to the garden. And we tried to do, I don't know how many times we've tried to do this already, but we've been trying for about 4 or 5 years, trying to get community members just to grow their own food. And some of them have, but this year we had about 15 people who actually grew their own food, sent us pictures of, peppers that they grew, tomatoes. And, that's the first step into really starting to feed ourselves. We have this big plot of land. You can feed a lot of people from that. But a lot of the food that I know about and all the medicines I know about are actually considered wild, or, weeds or invasives. But those are the foods and the medicines that I know. So just being able to create places for those medicines and for those plants to live is also important. It's not just about growing corn and growing tomatoes. It's making sure that we have, medicine, and that all of these things are growing together. And it's not just corn's here, tomatoes are here. We have to make sure that there's, relationship building and diversity in the plants also.
Yeah.
I think also to add on to that, and I think one of the biggest issues I feel working for nonprofits, and we could have a whole other episode about the nonprofit industrial complex, but
it's one that we've been wanting to have for a minute, so we'll bring you
on. For sure. And so I think one of the biggest issues is that they don't address the root of the problem, and what Janie said, it's we're getting food to our community, we're giving out food, we have these food boxes, but we also, I think, need to be spending the equal amount of time teaching our community how to grow these foods and cultivate the land in this way. We're not really addressing the root of the problem here. And so I think that's why I've really loved doing a lot of the work with Chi Nations. I also have a box at the garden. I'm growing peppers and tomatoes and also tobacco and sage. And so I think that is one of the most important things that we have to do for our community, is not just provide food for them, but to teach them how to grow, how to cultivate the land, and how to do it yourself.
Vanessa?
Yeah, I think there's so many different aspects of food sovereignty. One of the ones that's on my mind right now is, I just talked about these rabbits, right? And during the uprising, the youth had a building that they used to have a program in, and it was a media program. It's called McGeezy. And that building was lost in the uprising. Some of those youth are now at the Indian Center, and they're actually helping us with packaging the meals a few times a week. So like today, one of the youth was working side by side with me for a portion of the day just to make these berry cupcakes for elders meals this week. And hopefully when we get these rabbits, they'll also be in the kitchen with us to learn how to butcher them, and learning from natives firsthand about how to do that, how to make use of the animal. And it's an experience that a lot of folks don't get, especially in an urban setting. And another aspect would be like, the foods that we're working with. I'm learning a lot about how to cook these foods, the properties they have. I made one of my first recipes that I made up was a strawberry jam, strawberry chia jam with maple syrup, but I also wanted to taste like sweetgrass. So I put sweetgrass in there. And then really quickly, sorry, there's a lot of noise in the background. One of the women who is, she's an ethnobotanist, Linda Black Oak, she messaged to let me know that, one of the properties of sweetgrass is to be a blood thinner. So I should be careful in giving that to elders, so you have to kind of learn these plants and their properties, and just kind of, be mindful of how you're using them, be mindful of almost like their personalities, their characteristics. And one of the things I learned from one of the youth council, I think it was Adrian, he talked about that they wanted to plant sunflowers in the garden because they wanted to heal the soil, And when we're talking about food sovereignty, we're also talking about, the rights that these plants have to just exist, to just be, without needing to be food for us or to be consumed by us, but just, to exist, to help, because, plants and stuff can also heal the soil. They can heal decimated insect populations. They can do so much for so many other beings besides just humans, right? But then also it's when we bring back food, when we bring back certain crops, we also bring back a lot of the stories that go along with it, a lot of the knowledge in medicine, preparation, honoring of the plants. You could also tie in like lunar cycle and what phase is right for that plant to be planted in. Like there's so much knowledge that comes back with just bringing back one plant or just learning one plant. And that knowledge that you can gain from just one crop is endless, right? And then if I learn that much, then I can have those seeds and I can share that knowledge with, Janie and with Frankie, and it can just expand from there. And it also brings back dances and cultural, social dances like that too, which is an aspect. So when we have like invasive plants that are taking over, it really is very symbolic of like just any invasive species that comes and colonizes and takes over and kills the culture. It's kind of the same way in the plant family, right?
White culture is so boring. These bitches are just going to Whole Foods looking for a USDA organic. Y'all are like, yo, we are praying it is alive. We gotta dance with this motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like
they have songs, they got dances.
Oh, okay, beep, 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 got my apples.
Yeah. So I know a lot of people who, just aren't familiar with this, may not understand this. When we talk about the food sovereignty, there's just so many different branches it goes off into, and I'm learning things because this, for me, that's also why I wanted to get into food and kind of away from the union bricklaying aspect a little bit, at least for a break, was because it's so healing, right? There's so many things that I can learn, and it's so nourishing, it's so rewarding, and I can take that knowledge and share it with so many different communities, right?
Yeah, no, that's real. I started volunteering at Catatumbo Farms, which was a farm created by femmes and gender non-conforming, and immigrant people. And it's the same thing. I was like, I mean, it's a little bit complicated. I'm like, yo, my grandparents were coerced into this type of labor, and then at the same time, though, I'm like, yo, like this is but legit, like I got emotional when I was there the first time, and I'm like, I'm just planting a zucchini. What the fuck is wrong with me, right? So, so great. But how can we follow? How can we follow and keep up with your work and the stuff that you all are doing right now?
You can follow with ours. It's hashtag Feeding Our Elders. We're also doing a bit of work with Dream of Wild Health. So I was able to do an online thing with them one time, teaching them how to make like an apple crisp, so we are going to try to work with the youth moving forward as well with Dream of Wild Health, which is the native farm here in Minneapolis. So you can follow them. You can follow the Gatherings Cafe on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. And if you are on the land and you can't give it back because you're a renter or something, then give these organizations some money. Damn it! Go ahead, Francesca. What about how can we keep up with your stuff?
Yeah, the AIC is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Should be American Indian Center. I think on Twitter we're AIC Chicago or AIC of Chicago. But yeah, and also on our website as well.
Cool. And Janie.
Yeah, Chi Nations is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Frankie actually runs the Twitter and Instagram for the Youth Council. It's just Chi Nations Youth Council. I think Twitter is like Chi Nations _ or Chi_Nations. And if you want to donate, we have a business PayPal. It's paypal.me and then my full name, Janie Pochel.
Hey, nice. So let's give it up for our guests, Janie, Frankie, and Vanessa. Thank you so much for tonight's episode. We're going to keep things going with our updates and Rona reflection. Jackie, you're up with updates for the evening.
Hey everyone. So being in the media, I'm aware that a lot of, newspapers and local media are kind of keeping track of the COVID-19 demographics. And yet I really haven't heard much about how Native Americans are dealing with COVID-19. So I decided to just look up some statistics and basic information. And a recent report by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, just reported that while Black and Latinx people are 4 times more likely than white people to be diagnosed with COVID, Native Americans actually have it worse. They are 5 times more likely than white people to get coronavirus. And the CDC acknowledges at the federal level that this is not driven by genetics, right, but by the social conditions that Native people and people of color have been subjected to historically by white supremacy and the powers that be. So at the federal level, they're going to start tracking the demographic data, including race and ethnicity around COVID-19, so that they can better address the issue at a national level. And we're also seeing that at the local level. There's about 60,000 Native people in Chicago. The American Indian Health Service of Chicago has reported that Native Americans are testing positive at a higher number than the overall rate in Chicago. But part of the reason why we don't have accurate data is that American Indians are often labeled as other or possibly white, the way that Latinx people are often categorized as white. So I think that shows us the continued erasure of indigenous people, in every sector, including the medical sector. And that includes those people who also identify as Latinx and indigenous. There is a COVID-19 vaccine being created in Chicago right now in the labs of Northwestern University. And they have put out a call for 5,000 people who could test run this new vaccine that they hope will save lives. But they are looking for people who are at high risk of exposure. So essential workers, Native Americans, Black people, Latinx people, science needs you right now to make sure that this potential cure could also apply to our communities and could also work for us. So for more information, you can email nuvaccinestudy@northwestern.edu. The city's Department of Public Health is also putting out a call for hundreds of contact tracers. And these are the people that keep track of those who have been diagnosed and also the people near them who could be exposed. It's a way to socially control the spread of the disease. And apparently it's a practice that goes back to the days of Columbus, ironically or not. If you look at this like a job, it pays $20 an hour. They need bilingual people and people from the community. So check it out. And then finally, the last thing I want to say is that the city has announced another round of the rent lottery where they give $1,000 grants to a limited number of renters in need. So check it out at chi.gov/housing help. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Let's give it up for Jackie. And this city's so whack. They're like, we're gonna give you $1,000. That's it. And we're gonna close out with Charles Alexander Preston's Rona reflection for the week.
So I believe Indigenous lives matter, Native lives matters. I support that. I stand in solidarity with it. The onset of this pandemic has ravaged Indigenous communities that have already had poor access to health care and suffer from environmental racism under the brunt of US law. We can go to our southern neighbor, Brazil, and find that 9.1% of Indigenous people who contract the disease are dying, nearly double the 5.2% rate amongst the general Brazilian population. The Munduruku people, I hope I pronounced that right, alone have 10 sabios, or wise ones, who have died. People they consider elders, living libraries, community resources. Couple this with the deforestation of the Amazon and how it impacts the native people to it. And what we will find is accelerated genocide. Don't get me started on Canada, a Western country that touts itself as a multi-ethnic and multicultural utopia, yet Indigenous women make up 42% of the population of women in Canadian federal custody. They are in cage and separated from family during COVID-19. And you know, we have our own shit to handle here in Chicago. Our guest laid out what Native people struggle with here. And it was reported on June 22nd by the Daily Northwestern that a Native Americans in Chicago chart a 15% COVID-19 mortality rate. I can continue with statistics and information about the continued brutality, hate, and genocidal tactics of Western governing forces on Indigenous life. And it is imperative that those of us who aren't Native seek to be more informed on issues impacting Indigenous communities, but we must struggle together. As I sat on my laptop watching a live stream of the Black and Indigenous Solidarity Rally, I felt joy to visually see solidarity and people like resisting together. The Columbus statue is no longer standing because that solidarity and resistance scared the mayor and police shitless. Sure, Lori says the move is temporary, but the shit is down today. It was the power of the people that caused this, and I can't remember a time where I saw such a beautiful display of solidarity here. It's the type of shit that gets the feds here, that make police come more militarized to community barbecues by Homer Square. They are fucking scared when we organize together. For too long, we've seen the radical demands from Black people neglected, but their labor and death amplified. And for too long, we've seen Indigenous existence, resistance, and death be completely ignored by Western media, state actors, celebrities, fuck it, just capitalists in general. We have to continue to build and move these wheels of solidarity. But to me, that means showing up for each other just because. Of course, when there's a white supremacist statue to topple, or when the feds desecrate land by protecting oil pipelines, but we need that communal solidarity practice in the downtimes. I know I didn't know that there were Native people in Chicago until I was an adult. That is erasure, the type of subtle violence that infects communal consciousness. This is propaganda succeeding. So here's what I demand from Chicago: connection. Connect to the American Indian Center, connect to Shy Nations. Make it an issue that histories aren't being taught in classrooms and home. To combat this violence, we must impress it upon ourselves to know more about our neighbors. Make it an issue that young people are growing up without the awareness that Native people are still here and still resisting. True solidarity begins with recognizing and seeing our neighbor as our own. So we have work to do.
Yeah. Let's give it up for Charles Alexander Preston. We're giving snaps. I feel like I'm at a spoken word thing. I'm gonna make the face. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in so much. Again, I want to thank our guests Janie, Frankie, and Vanessa. Of course, have so much love for my co-hosts Charles and Jackie. We are going to be back next week with a special episode. It's going to be a roundtable with Hoodoisie family and crew, and we're going to be talking about what we've learned about power and resistance during the pandemic and the uprisings. And then we will be following it up with a secret show on August 12th. And then we'll be taking a break for a couple of weeks as we come up with and close out some other projects that we'll be hitting you with, like a anthology of think pieces from radical artists, activists, and academics. Janie's in it. Jackie's supposed to be in it. Give us your draft.
Coming.
But we're really excited about that, as well as guides for children about how to talk to them about the uprisings and the pandemic and a lot of other stuff. So stay tuned. Oh, and a creative activism teach-in at the end of the month, which would be kind of like our anti-Blackness and Latinidad teach-in that we had. And this will be 2 days of that as well. So got all that out. I'm going to repeat it next week. Maybe I shouldn't have said it. I just should have let us get off 2 minutes earlier, but I'm drunk on juice, Joe. So that's where I'm at right now. Thank you everybody so much for tuning in. I'm out to see you all. Peace.